There's a side of you that you never talk about. A version of yourself buried under politeness, fear, and expectation. It watches silently. It remembers every time you held back, every time you lied to yourself, just to fit in. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of your soul that contains everything you refuse to see. And if you ignore it long enough, it doesn't disappear. It waits.
It grows stronger in the dark until one day it takes control. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is not a theory. This is the quiet truth about why you sabotage yourself, why you attract chaos, why sometimes you can't recognize the person you've become, because the shadow is not your enemy.
It is you, the version you're afraid to meet. When you look in the mirror, you see your reflection, neat, controlled, familiar. But behind that reflection lives a stranger, the one who feels jealousy when you pretend to be happy for others, the one who imagines revenge, who hungers for recognition, power, and freedom. You silence this stranger because you've been told those feelings are wrong. But Jung warned, what we repress doesn't die. It hides and waits for a moment of weakness. Every saint has a devil behind their smile. Every confident person has a part that trembles with fear. Every gentle soul carries violence they pretend not to know. And the more you deny that side, the more it manipulates you from the dark. Maybe you've felt it too. That strange moment when you snap over something small. You say words you never thought you'd say. You hurt someone you love, or you destroy something you've built. In that moment, it wasn't really you. It was the shadow, finally breaking through the mask. Jung believed that the shadow carries all the traits we reject, not because they're evil, but because we've been taught to fear them. Aggression, pride, desire, selfishness, ambition. These are natural human drives. But society told you they're wrong. So you locked them away, not realizing they hold your strength, creativity, and authenticity. To become whole, Jung said, we must meet this stranger face to face, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. Because the shadow is not darkness itself. It's the light you refuse to claim. Think of someone who triggers you deeply. Maybe you hate how arrogant they are, or how confident, how unapologetic. You tell yourself, I could never be like that. But what if Jung was right, and that person is your mirror? He called it projection, the psychological process of throwing our own repressed traits onto others. The traits we condemn in others are often the ones we secretly fear or envy within ourselves. You dislike arrogance because you've buried your own confidence. You despise selfishness because you've been taught never to put yourself first. You mock people who chase attention because a part of you still craves to be seen. This is how the shadow reveals itself, not in nightmares, but in the people and situations that irritate you most. Every emotional reaction is a clue. Every judgment is a reflection. And if you're brave enough to look, you begin to see that the world isn't mocking you. It is showing you your unfinished self. Carl Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So the next time someone's behavior gets under your skin, don't react. Reflect. Ask yourself, what part of me is this showing me? That's where real self-awareness begins, not in light, but in the dark mirror of your shadow. From childhood, you've worn masks, to be accepted, to be loved, to be safe. You learned to hide anger to keep the peace. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You pretended to be fine when you were falling apart. But every mask has a cost. The more roles you play, the more disconnected you become from who you really are. And the shadow, the real you, begins to resent the mask. Jung saw this in his patients. The polite teacher who secretly fantasized about rebellion. The devoted parent who resented their children in silence. The spiritual seeker who judged others while pretending to be enlightened. Their lives looked normal, but their shadows were boiling underneath. When you wear too many masks for too long, you forget your own face. That's when the shadow takes over, through burnout, breakdown, or sudden self-destruction. You say, I don't know who I am anymore. But Jung would say, you've just met the parts you've abandoned. The shadow isn't a monster you destroy. It's a part of you begging to be understood. When you face it, you don't become darker. You become real. To integrate the shadow means to accept your contradictions. To admit you can love deeply and still feel hate. You can be generous and still crave power. You can be spiritual and still flawed. Wholeness isn't purity. Wholeness is truth. When you allow the shadow to speak, it teaches you empathy. It shows you how fragile everyone really is. It gives you energy that was once trapped in shame. You stop performing goodness and start being human. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The shadow isn't your curse, it's your map. Every fear, every judgment, every shame you carry points to a piece of yourself waiting to be reclaimed. The question isn't, how do I get rid of my darkness? The real question is, can I become who I am afraid to be? You've spent your whole life trying to be good. Good enough for your parents, for society, for the world. You've shaped yourself into what others could accept, quiet, responsible, controlled. But every time you kill a part of yourself to please others, the shadow grows stronger. Because what you repress doesn't disappear. It collects interest in the dark. And one day, the bill comes due. Maybe it begins with exhaustion. Maybe it's that hollow feeling even after success. You wake up one morning and realize you don't feel alive anymore. Because a life without authenticity is survival, not living. Carl Jung saw this again and again. People living behind masks so perfect they forgot who they were beneath them. He called it the persona, the social self you wear to be accepted. But behind every polished persona lives a shadow starving to be seen. You play the role of the kind one, but deep down, you're angry. You play the role of the strong one, but secretly, you're tired. You play the role of the smart one, but inside, you feel lost. And every day you drift further from yourself. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to remind you that you were human. That you can't be perfect all the time. That pretending to be light all the time is its own kind of darkness. Have you ever noticed how people who suppress their emotions the most are often the ones who explode suddenly? The calmest ones break the hardest. Because the shadow doesn't like being ignored. It will find a way to be seen, through anger, anxiety, depression, or chaos. Jung said that what we resist persists. If you keep denying the dark, it will keep knocking louder. There's a war happening inside you, between who you are and who you pretend to be. And until you make peace between them, you'll always feel divided. It's not easy to face the shadow. It shows you everything you don't want to see. Your jealousy, your hate, your insecurities, your pride. But beneath those flaws lies something sacred. Truth. The shadow carries your unlived life. The courage you never used, the words you never spoke, the boundaries you never set, the dreams you buried under fear. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting out your darkness, it means owning it. You can feel anger without becoming violent. You can acknowledge envy without letting it consume you. You can recognize pride without losing humility. That's power, not control by suppression, but awareness through understanding. The shadow speaks through dreams, slips of the tongue, emotional reactions, and even art. Jung used to tell his patients, listen to your dreams. They tell you what your waking mind refuses to hear. A man dreams of drowning. He's being consumed by emotions he's avoiding. A woman dreams of fire. She's burning with repressed passion or rage. A student dreams of a locked door, the shadow showing a part of the self still hidden. The language of the unconscious is symbolic, not literal, but every dream, every trigger, every fear, they are messages. The shadow doesn't punish, it teaches. And yet most people run from it. They distract themselves with noise, social media, constant work, endless entertainment, anything to avoid silence. Because in silence, the shadow speaks, and it says things that are hard to hear. But healing begins when you stop running. When you sit in the quiet and ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? What part of me have I abandoned? The answers will not come instantly, but they will come honestly. Jung believed that integration is not a one-time act. It's a lifetime of returning to yourself. Every time you judge someone, every time you react too strongly, every time you feel shame, the shadow is showing you something unfinished inside. To meet your shadow is to walk into the cave of your own mind, and like every hero's journey, the treasure you seek is hidden where you least want to go. You might lose people when you start becoming real. You might disappoint those who like the mask more than the face, but that's the price of truth. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you can't do that while pretending to be only half alive. So ask yourself, what would it mean to stop pretending? What would it cost you to finally be honest with yourself? And deeper still, what would you gain? There's a strange peace that comes when you stop hiding from yourself. You no longer need to prove, to impress, to seek validation. Because when you embrace your darkness, you stop fearing it in others. You become free, not perfect, but whole. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not to fix yourself, but to meet yourself, to see the tiredness behind your smile, the pain behind your politeness, and to say, it's okay, you belong too. That's where integration begins. Not in self-improvement, but in self-acceptance. Not by fighting the dark, but by holding its hand. The shadow isn't what makes you broken, it's what makes you real. And maybe that's the hardest yet most beautiful truth of all. You can become who you were meant to be until you face who you've always been afraid to meet. The deeper you look into your shadow, the more you begin to see it everywhere. In the world, in the people around you, in the systems that shape you. Carl Jung believed the world itself is a projection of the human psyche. The darkness we refuse to face within ourselves, we unconsciously recreate outside of us. That's why we're drawn to stories of heroes and villains, because they are reflections of our inner conflict. The hero is the conscious self, disciplined, controlled, rational. The villain is the shadow, wild, emotional, untamed. We cheer for the hero, but we can't stop watching the villain, because secretly, the villain represents the freedom we've been taught to suppress. Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's why the world feels so divided, because most people are still at war with themselves. Think about it. Every time you hate someone for their arrogance, you're hating your own need for power. Every time you mock someone's weakness, you're denying your own vulnerability. Every time you call someone evil, you're refusing to see the seed of that same potential within yourself. Jung called this the shadow projection. He warned that the more we reject our own darkness, the more we see it out there, in enemies, politics, religion, and even strangers. That's how wars begin. That's how hate grows. Because we forget. The shadow we fear in others is the shadow we've buried in ourselves. When you start owning your inner darkness, something strange happens. You stop needing to attack others. You stop taking everything personally. You begin to see pain behind people's actions, fear behind their anger. You begin to see the world not as good versus evil, but as conscious versus unconscious. The people who hurt you? They're ruled by their own shadows. The people who lie, manipulate, or destroy, they're not free. They're possessed by the parts of themselves they refuse to face. Jung often said that evil isn't some external force. It's human unconsciousness in action. And awareness, even a small amount, can change everything. Imagine if everyone on Earth suddenly became aware of their shadow, of their hidden fears, their secret desires, their true motives. The world would not be perfect, but it would be awake. Because most of humanity's suffering doesn't come from monsters. It comes from ordinary people acting out unconscious pain. And that's why Jung's message is timeless. He didn't tell us to chase the light. He told us to meet the darkness consciously, to make peace with the parts of ourselves that frighten us before they control us. But awareness comes at a cost. Once you see your shadow, you can't unsee it. You start noticing the moments when your ego defends itself, when your pride covers your fear, when your kindness hides a desire for approval. You begin catching yourself mid-sentence. Wait, am I being honest? Or am I performing goodness? It's humbling, it's uncomfortable, and it's freedom. Because awareness gives you choice. Before, you were reacting. Now, you are responding. Before, your shadow was driving you from behind the wheel. Now you're both in the car, talking, learning, understanding. The ego says, I must be perfect. The shadow whispers, I just want to be real. Integration is when they finally stop fighting, when you realize both have something to teach you. You don't destroy your ego, you guide it. You don't silence your shadow, you listen to it. That's how a divided self becomes whole. But be warned, once you start this inner work, the outer world reacts. The people who only knew your mask will resist your truth. They'll say, you've changed, and you'll smile, because for the first time that's true. As you integrate your shadow, your energy changes. You become grounded, calm, harder to manipulate, because you no longer fear your darkness, and no one can use it against you. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop seeking constant validation. You stop apologizing for existing. Because now, you're no longer just surviving the world, you're understanding it. Every trigger becomes a teacher. Every judgment becomes a mirror. Every wound becomes a doorway back to yourself. Jung believed that human evolution isn't about technology or progress. It's about consciousness. He said, the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. And that's how most people live, trapped inside identities they didn't choose, reacting to shadows they don't understand. But when you begin to see clearly, truly see, you realize the shadow isn't a curse on humanity. It's the soul's way of demanding honesty. Without the shadow, there is no empathy. Without darkness, light has no meaning. The shadow is the tension that holds life together. The friction between good and evil, peace and chaos, love and fear. It's the proof that you're alive, still capable of feeling, learning, evolving. Look around you. Every great artist, philosopher, or revolutionary, they all faced their shadow. Nietzsche wrestled with madness. Van Gogh painted his pain. Jung himself faced visions that terrified him, and instead of running, he studied them. That's what made his wisdom so powerful. It wasn't theory, it was survival. He once wrote, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." That's the essence of the shadow. The deeper you dare to descend, the higher you can rise. So when you see darkness in the world, don't just despair. Ask yourself, what part of humanity does this reflect in me? Where is my own light sleeping? Because that's where transformation begins. Not in rejecting evil, but in understanding it. Not in escaping the shadow, but in embracing the mirror it holds up. In the end, the world outside you is just a reflection of the world within. Heal one, and you begin to heal the other. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That single sentence holds the key to everything: healing, purpose, transformation. Because the truth is, the person you're meant to be is hiding behind the person you're most afraid to face. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your invitation. It's life whispering, you can't grow until you stop pretending. Most people spend their lives running from the parts of themselves that make them uncomfortable: anger, jealousy, desire, shame, fear. But what if those emotions aren't flaws? What if they're messages? What if everything you've been avoiding is the very thing that could set you free? Jung discovered that the shadow holds your repressed power. The instincts, courage, and creativity you locked away to fit in. You weren't born weak. You were trained to be safe. You weren't born afraid. You were taught to hide. And every time you suppressed your truth, your shadow grew stronger, waiting for the day you'd finally turn around and listen. When you face your shadow, something begins to happen. You stop being afraid of other people's opinions. You stop apologizing for wanting more. You stop trying to be good all the time and start trying to be real. That's the transformation Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. It's not about perfection or purity. It's about balance, the dance between light and dark, love and rage, creation and destruction. You stop living as a fragment and start living as a totality. But here's the paradox. To truly meet your shadow, you must become who you are afraid to be. The part of you that speaks when you've been silent too long. The part of you that says no when everyone expects you to say yes. The part of you that creates instead of conforms. That part, that dangerous, alive, unapologetic self, is you. We fear our power because power demands responsibility. We fear our truth because it destroys our illusions. We fear our freedom because it means no one else is to blame. But once you step into it, even for a moment, there's no going back, because for the first time you feel alive. Not comfortable, not certain. Alive. That's what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Not the mask, not the role, the real, raw consciousness beneath it all. When you integrate your shadow, your life stops being a performance. You no longer act kind to appear kind. You are kind because you've made peace with your cruelty. You no longer chase success to feel worthy. You are worthy because you've faced your failure. You no longer seek love to escape loneliness. You are love because you've embraced your own emptiness. That's the quiet revolution Jung pointed to. A shift from living unconsciously to living consciously. And it begins in the smallest moments. When you choose honesty over comfort. When you listen instead of reacting. When you forgive without forgetting. When you finally say to yourself, "This darkness is mine, and that means I can transform it." Because once you own your shadow, no one can weaponize it against you. No insult, no rejection, no betrayal can break you. Because you've already met the part of you that survives everything. You become dangerous, not because you harm, but because you can't be controlled. You become powerful, not because you dominate, but because you understand. That's what Jung called the birth of the self. The union of opposites, masculine and feminine, logic and feeling, human and divine. And when this happens, something almost mystical unfolds. You stop seeing the world as divided. You stop seeing people as enemies. You begin to sense the same unconscious drama playing out in everyone. The same pain, the same longing, the same shadow. You realize that we're all fragments of a single story. Consciousness, trying to understand itself. And that changes everything. You start forgiving, not because they deserve it, but because you no longer want to carry their darkness as your own. You start helping others see what you once denied. The beauty in their chaos, the meaning in their pain. You start creating, not from fear of being forgotten, but from the joy of expression. And maybe that's why Jung's work still matters. Because he wasn't teaching psychology. He was teaching alchemy. The transformation of the soul through the confrontation with darkness. He saw that the shadow isn't meant to be exiled. It's meant to be integrated, turned into wisdom, empathy, strength. Every time you face a fear, you reclaim energy that was once trapped in it. Every time you forgive yourself for being human, you take back your light. Every time you speak your truth, you dissolve another illusion. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to stop running. You just have to turn around and say, "Okay, I see you." Because the shadow doesn't destroy, it reveals. It shows you what's real. It shows you what matters. It shows you you. And maybe that's the most terrifying realization of all. Not that there's darkness inside you, but that there's greatness too. The shadow isn't there to break you. It's there to make you whole, to strip away everything false until all that remains is truth, raw, unfiltered, and alive. So when you ask, "Who am I?" the answer isn't found in the light. It's born in the darkness, in the places you were once too afraid to look. Because that's where your soul has been waiting. Not in perfection, but in paradox. Not in who you think you should be, but in who you truly are. In the end, Jung's message is simple, but it echoes through eternity. You are not the mask you wear. You are not your fears, nor your wounds. You are the consciousness big enough to hold them all, the light and the dark. And when you finally stop running from what you fear, you don't become less human. You become more divine. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. So, become who you are afraid to be. That's where your freedom begins. That's where you meet yourself. That's where the shadow ends and the soul begins.